Good morning. Welcome to HIDB. I'm super proud and super happy to be your keynote today. I'm a bit nervous, so excuse me if I speak a bit fast. Anyway, so this morning, I'm here to talk to you about the past, the future, and wherever the hell we are now. A little bit about myself. The introduction was quite short. Hello, this is me. This the pink girl over here to the left, this is me. I'm a security researcher. I only done this for a couple of years now. When did I start? In 2011. So I might not have half the experience of most of the people in the room, but I have a very long track record of changing jobs. And changing my jobs every so often, I learn lots of things that go right in our world and lots of things that go wrong in our world. And today I'm going to tell you about all the things that I saw that got me very excited about keeping up my job in security and keep on going and trying to make things better. So just recently, about half a year ago, I made another job change and moved to Portland, Oregon to start my work at Intel as a security engineer. And you might know that Intel is a large company and they produce very complex technology and they have lots of problems that we can work on. So this was a very exciting change for me. What also came with the change, of course, are the legal disclaimers. So since I now work for Intel, I have to tell you that I do not speak for Intel. Anything I say up on the stage is my own sole opinion and does not include or present opinions of my employer, Intel Corporation, or its affiliates. Either way, back to myself. So I'm not going to be speaking for 45 minutes about myself. What do I mean if I say I have a long track record of changing jobs? So I started my professional experience as a scripting monkey at an antivirus company. I went on to be a malware analyst at this antivirus company. I studied myself and to become a reverse engineer. I really fell in love with the x86 instruction set. From there, I went into something that they still call advanced threat detection. From there, I went to live out my hobby as a nation-state malware observer, as I like to call it. From there, I went into incident response. Saw not that many nation-state malwares, but lots of ransomwares. From there, I went low-level because I was disappointed. Why was I so disappointed? Oh, I missed one important thing that I did in my life. I spoke at HIDB. This is my first Hack in the Box. I'm super happy to be here, just to have mentioned that once. All right. Lots of things that I did, and lots of disappointment, and lots of moments being upset. But why? Why did I change jobs so often, or why did I decide to go even lower than the instruction set, the x86 instruction set? And why was I upset? In my younger years, when I was picking my first jobs and picking up my first challenges, I would call myself a believer. I started to work like long time ago before I went lower. I started to work as a malware analyst in antivirus, and I really thought technology there works. But let me start at the end of the story. So recently I decided to go low. What do I mean with go low? If you start work at Intel, they tell you, I'm not kidding, you have 6 months of time to ramp up on the topics that we're working on here. And I thought they were kidding me. 6 months of time, I thought in 6 months of time someone can build a CPU. And I was wrong. It turns out I've been in there for 7 months and I'm slowly starting to figure out how things work. And we're not even there yet. So if you start working on the Intel microarchitecture, I would compare that with someone gives you a little ice pick and then puts you in front of an iceberg and tells you, here, work on that. So this is where I am right now, trying to ramp up still. This whole story of my professional experience, though, started a long time ago, let's say in a land far away, when, as I mentioned, I was a malware analyst and I was a believer. So in 2011, I started work at an antivirus company, and I started work on their signature database. I started work on their product. I started work on their backend. I wrote lots of scripts for automation, for automated analysis. I did some research on artificial intelligence and feature extraction and whatnot. And I really thought that we improved defense that way, until I realized, after spending about 2 or 3 years in the industry, that what we do is we run after the threats, not the threats run from us. So, in a sense, the classical way of threat detection, as I learned, was to create patterns that detect threats, which implies that we knew the patterns before we knew the threats, because we wanted to find the threats that we didn't know. I figured out in the whole threat detection scene overall, we all are searching for something. After antivirus, I went into advanced threat protection, whatever that term implies, and I found out that even there, where everything is more advanced, people are still searching for patterns. We all search for patterns that are either known to be bad, we're searching for patterns that are known to be good, we're searching for patterns that are not known to be good, if you want to only whitelist things that are known to be good. And in the end, this covers all of the technology that is out there. Whether we search for signatures, whether we search for behavior, whether we search for anomalies, whether we apply artificial intelligence and machine learning, whatever technology we apply, we also always search for patterns. If those patterns aren't there, we have no chance of actually finding the threat. This is why threat protection is stuck in a loop for the past couple of years. We try to come up with smarter patterns. We would love to have one pattern that finds everything that's bad and nothing that's good. We would like to have that pattern that is super small, so we can store it in small databases and don't cover all the memory of our customers. We would like to have the one pattern that no one can break. So this one pattern will always find all the bad stuff and never find all the good stuff. And this pattern just doesn't exist. This is why we're stuck in this scenario. And as you can see on the screen, I used SID from Ice Age to represent what we cannot do, because SID is hunting his hazelnut. And the benefit that SID has with that hazelnut is that he can see the hazelnut. He knows how the hazelnut looks like. In threat detection, we never even knew how the hazelnuts they were hunting for look like. So from there, I went on to be a believer in indicators of compromise. I thought if we make our patterns just smarter, we could eventually cover all the bad things and leave out all the good things. And so let's find the threats. And then I found another paradox in threat detection, which is a couple of years ago, people said antivirus is dead and signature matching and pattern matching doesn't work anymore. And then they came up with threat intelligence and indicators of compromise, and they stuffed those indicators of compromise with patterns. And eventually I was sitting there. So before we had signatures that were byte patterns, now we have domain names and MD5 hashes. And how did we get smarter over the years? How did this get better? And turns out eventually we didn't. So yeah, I'm asking you, spot the problem. We're still trying to find things that we don't know with patterns. And are epically stuck on that. So this is why I'm talking about the threat detection myth. After a couple of years in threat detection, I figured out that this is all not actually what I wanted to work in, because it's not working the way I thought it should be working. That might be the teenage me being disappointed with the dream that I had. But overall, I would assess that, as the opening note stated, businesses will business. Any customer that you have the trust in antivirus, the trust in threat protection, they're still mainly interested in their own business and their own making money and putting food on their tables. And in that sense, they will happily rely on the threat detection myths that we sell them. On the other hand, you have antivirus engineers. I've been there, I've been sitting there, I've been engineering threat protection mechanisms. And when I did this, you have to consider, I was in my 20s and I had no idea how large networks look like. I engineered my threat detection metrics like I have to protect one computer. And this is true for most of the engineers that work on this technology. They want to protect one computer. They want to protect 5 computers. They have no idea how to protect thousands of computers that are all on the same network and need the same kind of protection. And in the end, the myth that I'm actually talking about, why it will always work but never does, is because, as I mentioned, we come up with patterns that detect things that we don't know. There's some, let's say a new vulnerability is discovered or a new exploit appears in the threat landscape. The theory goes that as soon as the vulnerability is out, threat protection can come up with patterns to detect exactly that threat that exploits the vulnerability. But in the end, this is a lost game. There's so many vulnerabilities, there's so many exploits that the system just can't keep up with the threat detection. So yeah, I was frustrated and I left. I went on to explore the world of tooling, as I would say. So in my time and working in advanced threat protection, I saw our engineers come up with mathematical models that I never did and will never understand, that magically take in data and come out with threat detection. So What I'm talking about is artificial intelligence and the threat detection aided by machine learning, where if we just had the features that would describe the threats, we could mathematically determine whether some sample or some attack is, or some certain item is malicious and could detect it that way. Turns out, though, the longer I was sitting there, I was wondering, like the smart mathematicians with their models, I trust them. I know that they're doing their job well. I know that machine learning, artificial intelligence work. What I'm not sure about is that they understand the data they feed their algorithms. So, looking at the advanced threat protection systems, they try to determine whether they have apples or oranges in front of them based on features like the outside temperature and the size of the tree that the product has grown on. This is what we're talking about when we speak about advanced threat protection. We have feature sets. We need feature sets that eventually describe the size of the apple, the color of the apple, the smell of the apple, and not the size of the tree on which it is grown on. In that sense, I dug deeper into the whole problem of features. I'm not kidding, I spent long nights on figuring out which features tell me whether a binary or whether an actual item of interest is malicious. And I came up with many ideas. I had long lists of features that would tell me whether something is malicious or not. And then I tried to implement my ideas and figured out that the tools aren't actually there to get those features. So I dove into reverse engineering tool development in order to be able to extract static features from binaries, because this is what I thought was the solution. If we just had better features, we could improve threat detection forever. So I tried to figure out how could I automatically extract features from binaries without having to pay thousands and thousands of dollars in licenses of tools. And I figured out there is tools out there. They work on the machines of the developers that develop them. In a sense, I see someone laughing in the audience who knows what I'm talking about. The problem of static analysis, as I see it, tell me if you think I'm wrong, that's totally fine. The problem as I see it is that developing tools for static analysis or developing anything that helps reverse engineering in the lower level is not worth the market that wants to buy it. If you look into static analysis tools, there's very few products out there that can actually be bought. They're ridiculously expensive. The products that are out there that are open source and free are beautiful, but don't always produce the data that you want to have from them. And I figured out that there's at least one open source reverse engineering tool out in the wild that is super promising and is actually very impressive and has been developed for more than 10 years, but only one single guy, more or less, who totally is in love with this project and wants to keep it going. But the guy has to eat too. The other people that work on the project are students and do most of the time in their spare time, and they're super engaged. They produce lots of code. Most of the code works, but they also have to eat. And that's a major problem that I see in static analysis, why we can't have nice features that could in the end improve our threat detection by so much further, because we don't have the tools, because the people who write them actually want salaries. In the end, if I look at the whole threat detection landscape, at all the products that we have out there, if I look at all the money that went into sandboxes for dynamic analysis, if I just think that if we had taken some of those percentages, like some of the money, put it aside, and gave it to the people who write static analysis tools, we could have dynamic and static detection next to each other, which would improve our detection quality by so much further. You just think about it. At the root of it, though, I blame places like Silicon Valley for exactly the problem that we have today, because they run after selling products more than they run after security. And of course they do, because businesses there will business too. So in the end, they want to sell their product, and it turns out that sandboxes and blinking boxes have sold a lot better in the past than disassemblers. Anyway, I went on from the disassemblers. What I saw there, or what I saw in myself when I tried to develop tools in reverse engineering, I'm not exceptionally good at that, by the way. I'm a terrible software engineer, and so are most people. The tools that I wrote had massive problems with vulnerabilities in themselves, with functionality lacks, with updates. I haven't updated the last tool that I wrote within, I think, 8 months. And I figured out this is a vast problem for all of us. And then when I started at Intel, I figured out that my problem wasn't actually software engineering, but my problem was reading. So with the first tasks that I was tasked to do, or to solve at Intel, my mentor gave me the Intel SDM, the Software Developer's Manual. He gave me my task and he said, figure it out. And I was sitting there with a manual, and the chapter that could or should have told me how to solve my problem was only 50 pages long. If you look at the manual, it has almost 5,000 pages. So 50 pages isn't that much at all. So I sat down, I read those 50 pages and tried to figure out the solution for my problem. And after I sat there for 2 days reading that manual, trying to find exactly what I needed, I figured out it's not in there. And I went back to him and said, it's not, like, I don't know what to do. I don't find my solution. And he said, go back, read it again, you'll find it. And in the end, I found the solution for my problem. It was outlined in half a line. It was maybe almost 1 line of text in a paragraph on page, I don't know, 24 of the 50 pages that I was supposed to read. And this was my solution. And in the end, I figured out I could have seen this. I could have looked closer. I could have tried again. I could have tried harder. I could have been more exact and more structured in my way of work, and I would have found that solution. But I didn't, because, well, 4,810 pages are really scary. And if you start on a professional project, may it be software development or reverse engineering, whatever you want to do, and you look at this vast amount of information in front of you, it's scary, right? Most people look at that and they're like, nah. And they go back to what they did before and try to solve the problem with the things that they already know. But the solution in that case, or for me personally, would have been to step out of my boundaries and go back and read the text again and try harder and fail more and write more code to test my problem and to improve that code and eventually make it work. So yeah, I learned how to read. Also, what's interesting about problems at Intel, some problems are answered within the SDM. So some answers you can find in there, and some problems are just not documented in there. So for some issues that I've been tasked to work on, they're just not described in the 5,000 pages of manual. And this is rather scary. But let's go on. What did I learn about security at conference expo halls? That's a tough one. So this expo hall is empty, but imagine that this expo hall is full of exhibitors, full of big companies that all represent their products and whatever people do at security expos. Coincidence has it that in 2015, I was present at the RSA conference in San Francisco, but not at the actual conference, but at the booth of my company. So the company thought that it was a good idea to have a researcher at their booth. So there were like 6 sales agents and our manager and me. And we're there to represent the company. What I didn't know then is that we were actually supposed to talk to people that were interested in our products. That was an interesting experience. But what was more interesting is that most people came up with questions that I couldn't answer. I was there expecting questions about our machine learning algorithms that we use for evaluating our features. I was expecting questions about the features that we extracted, or about how our detection qualities are, or about how our throughput is. But people came up and asked me about the bandwidth our product could cover, and about how many machines they could protect with one of our boxes, and about how the approach scales, and about how often updates come in, and about how easy updates can be put into the machine, and how easy feeds can be fed into the machine, and which data formats we support. And I had no idea of any of this, because I just hadn't thought that this was the points that were important to customers. That showed me that there is the research community. I count myself part of that. We like to pick apart bits and bytes. And then there's people who are interested in getting their business going and keep on selling their own services with the help of our security products that we try to sell them. And turns out they're more interested in keeping their business going than in the security of their business, which of course they do, because this is what puts money on their tables, what puts food on their tables, and what gets them their income. So I learned that me as a researcher, I was partially running the wrong direction. I was judging the technology that we had without considering the customers that had to use it in the end. And me renting doesn't actually help them all that much. And I went on learning throughout my field trip in security. I also learned that not only our customers, but also our larger community sees IT security as something totally different than what I had expected. Spring of 2017, I had the honors of participating in an OSCE conference in Vienna. OSCE is tasked with security within Europe and between European states and the larger nation-state community out there, and they manage communications between those states. Anyhow, in 2017, OSCE tasked themselves with spending more of their time on cybersecurity. So in 2017, they formed a cybersecurity conference in Vienna. And I was there on the podium telling them about problems of malware and security problems overall. And I was impressed. I was very impressed by the present audience that had never seen a debugger before. They have no idea what a disassembler is. They don't know what a rootkit is and why a rootkit is, in theory, more sophisticated than a ransomware or whatever the different categories are. But they were interested in why Russia would deny that they ever hacked any computer in Ukraine. They were interested in the cyber powers of the United States compared to the cyber powers of France. They were interested in establishing more communication links before any cyber attack escalates on international levels. And I realized I have no idea what these people are talking about. So I know my ransomware, I know my rootkits. I don't know how Russia talks to the United States. So in the end, I figured out that there's different levels to security that I didn't even know exist. For one, the customers that are interested in selling their services, the policy people that are interested in communicating properly so we can all keep on living in peace. And all of them do not actually care about the bits and bytes and the threat detection in between. So yeah, I learned a lot on my field trip into policy world and the art of the nation-state 101s. But the reason why I was actually invited to speak there, or I was actually present at the conference, was because before that I had spent a vital part of my spare time on analyzing nation-state malware. A couple of years ago, I gave a talk about the A and the P of the T. That means the advancedness and the persistence of the threat of APTs. I like that little joke of mine because most of the APT malware, or the so-called APT malware that I've been looking at, was not all that sophisticated. Let's put it like that. So the vast majority of mass malware is packed, uses encryption to protect its communication, uses anti-analysis measures, evades sandboxes, does all the nasty tricks that if you start into malware analysis will give you lots of headache. And then you start into advanced threats and look at those advanced threats and figure out they don't use packers, they don't use encryption, they kind of obfuscate their strings sometimes, but they don't really protect themselves from being analyzed. And I was surprised. On the other hand, though, there are advanced threats that I would totally consider advanced that we neatly call big game. So the whole APT hunting I'm not sure we can call it a community. Within those few people who like to dedicate themselves to advanced threats, we were all diving into this fear because we were after the big glorious examples. Like we all heard about Stuxnet in the past, and there was Regin, there was Black Bear, like all the different bears of Russia. Like there is some interesting malware out there. There is really good binaries out there. But what I learned in looking closer at those binaries, I'm not kidding you, most of them are mediocre software at best. If you open up a commercial executable, like let's say you look into Microsoft Word, or don't do that. That would probably disturb their end-user license agreement. Take any larger application that you use on Windows and put it in a disassembler and then compare it to whichever advanced threat you can get your hands on in a disassembler as well. And you will see that the code structures of the commercial product or of the larger application are a lot more complex. So in the end, I figured that all the big game out there, at the beginning of it is software, in the end is headache-inducing malware, but it's not as advanced as we would have liked it to be. What is interesting, though, in the whole big game hunting community is that we're all researchers. Again, we look at bits and bytes. We like our obfuscations, we like our sandbox evasions. That's all the things that get us excited. But in the end, we don't actually have an idea of why these binaries are used for political purposes. And by no means I'm saying that they should. I'm totally against using any sort of cyber threat for targeting individuals in the name of politics, or whichever political motivation might be behind there. But I have to state here that no one in the big game hunting community, whichever company they work for, whichever country that company is located in that they work for, has any idea of why nation states, or which motivations drive nation states to use those cyber tools. Yeah, that's why I'm saying we're all APT big game hunting, like Carl would. Yeah, and as I just mentioned, I just wish all the advanced threats were that advanced. Then it would be a little bit more interesting. So in the end, what did I just talk about? What did I learn from nation-state malware about cyber war? Because this is what we're all thinking about when we hear nation-states send out malware and infect individuals. What I actually learned about the whole scenery out there is pretty much nothing. Some of you might have heard that I have a special affinity to French malware. Some of you might have heard that I looked into other nation-state malwares as well. Yeah, I saw binaries, like especially in the case where I looked into French nation-state malware, I saw their binaries, I saw what the binaries can do, I saw what the binaries cannot do. I have very little information about where the binaries were found. Looking at the overall information landscape that I have no idea why France would write malware and use it to spy on individuals in other countries. And in a sense, I'm a binary researcher. I cannot know. Why would I? I have no political background. So earlier this year, I was at a security conference in Germany called Troopers, and I watched a talk by a security researcher called Mara Tam. She has a background, she has a PhD in history, and she has spent large amounts of her research time working on arms control. And then from arms control slipped into cyber arms control, and now she's looking at nation-state malware, because that's exactly what we're talking about, cyber arms. If you're interested in hearing someone who actually knows politics and policy speaking about nation-state malware, I would totally recommend checking out her presentation and her GitHub repository, where she tells us what it actually takes to understand those attacks, which would be reading about what was that documents of 20 years of mostly failed cyber norms at the United Nations. Because there you will learn a lot of why nation states are interested in cyber arms. But also, yeah, one of my hobbies in the past was attribution, and I really like this quote from Eva Side on Twitter when she said, "When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like APT28." In the end, I would attest us as a nation-state research community that we do not really know what's going on there. We are just, how is that? Someone on Twitter mentioned the community is more like sports commentators, picking on particular actions that the actors are deciding to show us. And the rest of what's happening, we don't really have an insight. Finally, after I kind of sneaked out from the nation-state malware research, I went into incident response. Initially, I thought that in incident response, I would see how the attacks actually happen, which I did. Incident response is a great field if you want to learn how attacks are actually performed. If you get to analyze the whole the whole path of where the attackers came from, how they got into the network, what they did in the network, and how they got out again of the network, or how they got data out again of the network. That's a very instructive exercise. But in the end, I was frustrated there again, because it turns out if you work on incident response nowadays, what you mostly see is ransomware. Turns out that most of the incidents that we try to fix today, I'm not saying there's no APT happening, but I'm saying most of them are not the advanced, persistent threats that me as an analyst was hoping for, but it's usually ransomware. And it's also usually large companies with large networks that get hit the hardest, and their larger problem is not that they have ransomware in the system, like they can reset their boxes, they can recover their data. The larger problem is that they have no idea how those threats got into their network, because their networks are so huge. And that gets me back to where I started from in the beginning. Businesses will business, and security researchers will security research, and we will be ranting. We'll be ranting a lot. We're huge cynicists. We will be criticizing. We'll be going on Twitter. We'll be getting out the popcorn. We'll be watching the world burn. And we will never understand the problems of the other side if we don't take any time to look at what other professions are interested in. If you have a law company, they want to do law. They don't necessarily want to do firewalls. So this is the problems that we should be working on, rather than criticizing from the bottom up that these people don't understand binary. Looking at ourselves that we don't understand what these people are actually after. The updatability problem has also been mentioned in the opening note. If you have a large network, you'll see wonders and wonders of things that are happening on that network. One of my first incident responses when I started in that field was at a hospital. You will not believe how hospital networks look like. I wish someone would at some point get down and write papers on how hospital networks would look like, because that's actually scary. If you have any plan to go to a hospital soon, don't listen so closely, it's all okay. But if you go in there and you look at like the patient zero, and you find out the patient zero is a Windows 2000 server that is not exactly connected to the closed off bubble of the network where it couldn't talk out, but kind of has direct internet connection. And if you then look at what was that, the domain controllers, and figure out that there isn't like 5, but kind of like 50 domain admins on there. And if you ask someone if they know where, well, the other 45 came from, and no one actually knows, then you have a long day. Usually those incidents, by the way, all happen on Friday afternoon. I'm not kidding. Every time, Friday afternoon. Finally, what else did I learn in incident response? The belief and the lack of belief is a large problem, not only in incident response, but in the whole security industry, and writing products, in politics, and nation state, in writing nation state malware, and the lack of nation state malware there. So belief is something that I think is a human trait. We all like to believe in things. We like to make our opinions. We like to believe in our moral, and we like to stick to that. And we just refuse to believe in things that do not fit our picture of the world. Now, this is a very interesting experience when you talk to administrators that have been doing their job for the last 15 to 20 years, and have been doing their things the same every day, and it has worked for 15 years. And then someone like me comes up and tells them, maybe those administrators that you have there on your domain controller, you should remove them, because you probably don't need them all. And these people just don't like to believe that things are changing, because that's what humans do. We don't like change. So yeah, this was why, again, you're welcome to criticize me on anything of this. I've only spent a year in incident response, because then I was too frustrated to stay even one more day, and left incident response back again to where I came from. Oh yeah, what I mentioned before, we don't have nation-state malware that, we don't have mass malware that is interesting. I wasn't actually that right. Also mentioned in the opening note the case of WannaCry, where the NSA afterwards has linked the WannaCry virus to North Korea. Something that I learned in attribution is that if attribution is mainly done on information that's not public, someone comes up with an attribution conclusion that's usually not done based on the strings that you find in the binary, And if a large institution that has lots of information that's not public comes up with a conclusion, they usually have a reason for why. So if the NSA says it's North Korea, they might be correct. Anyway, so all of a sudden, I was working in incident response at the time. I saw lots of ransomware. All of a sudden, there was ransomware that apparently was created by a nation-state actor. And that was the point when I literally turned around and I decided I will never come back. That's when I went down low. So going low, what did that mean when I said we're going low? Again, I'm there with the ice pick, and there's the large iceberg, and I'm trying to fight my way through. There's a world beyond x86. Microarchitecture is vast. What CPUs nowadays do is millions of little things. I have no aspiration whatsoever to understand any of it. And as a security researcher, when you're dumped into that whole pool, there is a whole lot of new challenges that you have to face. I had an interesting conversation before this keynote with one of my colleagues who is an experienced exploit author and has dedicated lots of time on Linux kernel exploitation. And he lined out to me of why about his motivation of why he joined our team, which was he initially started exploitation in userland, had lots of experience there, back in the days when there weren't many protections. Then userland came up with more and more protections, so exploits wouldn't be that easy there anymore. And then he moved to kernel because there were less protections. It was still a more complex field to figure out, but the level of security down there wasn't as advanced as it was in userland already. So then he went around kernel, and now he went into the wonderlands of CPU security, because there's still lots of things to discover down there. What you need for taking this step, we also had a lengthy conversation about changing careers. As you've seen before, most of my professional life I've spent on threats and threat protection, and it took me lots of energy, lots of guts and pain resistance, lots of sweating, lots of tears, lots of frustration to work my way towards microarchitectural security. And finally, what it takes from me personally to get wherever your research goal takes you is lots of patience, lots of practice, lots of repeats. As Halvar lined it out on Twitter, CPU microarchitecture is a world of black magic, dragons, and endless trial and error. And this is exactly what I've just been talking about, endless trial and error, otherwise you'll be eaten by the dragons. Some weeks ago, I found my first bug at Intel. I was super proud. Here is the bug that's literally inside of Intel. What did I do to dig my way to the lower level? I don't have much experience in offensive research. What we do, my team at Intel, is mainly offensive research. We try to hack our own product, and let's just mention that's super complex. So what did I do? I went back to school. Since I joined the company, I've written a whole list of hello worlds. I've got back to the start, to the simple things. I wrote a hello world in Intel SGX. I wrote a hello world as a Linux kernel module. I wrote a hello world in microcode as a patch, and I wrote another hello world that I'm legally not allowed to speak here. Anyway, so a long list of things where I started from scratch again. There was an interesting conversation by Haroon, an interesting presentation. I think it was a keynote by Haroon Mir a couple of years ago that was titled "You and Your Research." I would very much recommend watching that presentation, because Haroon neatly lines out that you can conquer one field after another, but once you're specialist in one particular field, it's very hard for you personally and for your public reputation to go back to writing hello worlds. This is what you're supposed to do. If you conquer a new field, you start with the simple things, and you go more advanced, and you conquer this area, and then you go into the next area, and so on and so forth. But this is, turns out, sometimes very, very hard to jump over your own shadow and go back to the school bench. But that's, for me, what is the meaning of growth. If you never go back to the school bench, if you never go back to writing hello worlds and trying to figure out new things, you will never actually grow. The whole process of growing mentally is a very uncomfortable process. I was very frustrated when I was sitting there trying to write my first SGX application, and I failed and failed and failed, and it took me a week and a half to even compile my hello world. I'm not kidding, I was this bad. But in the end, I managed to. I was growing, and I realized how uncomfortable it was. I thought myself I was an experienced security researcher. I can reverse engineer nation-state malware, but I cannot compile a project in Visual Studio. That was very frustrating. Anyway, in the end, once you manage your new goals, you grow and grow, and you'll see the more goals that you reach, the faster you actually grow. I've seen the same things with a couple of students of mine. Some of you might have heard that some years ago, I started a workshop. I started a reverse engineering workshop, or it's actually a boot camp. It's a free reverse engineering boot camp, and it's for women only. Some years ago, I came up with the idea of putting a workshop together and sit down with the 2 women I knew who were interested in learning reverse engineering. And I thought this would be sort of a pajama party with our notebooks at home, and we would look at the binary. And I put a blog post together, and I asked if someone else wanted to join me, and all of a sudden there were 15 registrations. I didn't know there were 15 women in security that wanted to learn reverse engineering. And that was when Black Hoodie was born. Black Hoodie is a free reverse engineering bootcamp for women. We have 3 editions so far from 2015, 16, 17. There's a typo on the slide. No, it's not 2015. Oh, yeah, in the first year we had 15 attendees. The second year we had 32. And last year, the 3rd edition, we had 67. You see, we double our size every year, which is kind of scary. We had lots of different nationalities, lots of different continents, and the girls that came to the workshop were super motivated. I was scared. Up until that workshop, I was a teacher at a university in Austria. I was teaching reverse engineering classes, and my classes were male only. That wasn't my decision. There was no decision made ever on this. Of course, it was how it naturally was. There were no women in the security courses, so I was sitting there teaching male-only classes, and at some point, I was so bored by that, I said I want a women-only class too. This is one of the reasons why I founded the workshop and made it as damn challenging as possible. Most of the attendees in the workshop were juniors, so they were kind of just starting to learn what a debugger is and starting to learn how disassemblers work. And I said, let's sit down together for 2 days. We're going to reverse engineer a piece of malware. Most of them were, well, kind of nervous. This looks difficult, this looks challenging. And I told them, don't be scared. This is something challenging, but we can get there in 2 days. And after those 2 days, you'll have mastered something complex. And having mastered something complex gives you the feeling like you can do that again. You have done something difficult, now everything that's simple is super easy. And then I saw most of the attendees that went back to conquer those easier fields like super swiftly. I saw most of them grow faster than I had ever seen with any of my university students in my male-only classes. And now, why? Why am I doing a workshop? Why am I thinking this makes sense? Why am I watching those girls just blow my mind every year and again and again? Let's start how I got into the industry. In the beginning, when I started going to school, I went to a software engineering school when I was 14. I looked like that bird on the left side. I was 1 out of 3 girls within 36 students, and we were walking into that class and we're like, I'm not sure I belong here. I'm not sure I'm comfortable here. This looks weird. And this was like the story throughout my life. So after this engineering school, I went to university. I studied a security program in Austria. There were 3 women within 29 students. After that, I went to the antivirus companies in the lab. I was the only woman within 7 engineers. And then I went to the advanced threat protection company. I was the only woman in research within, I think, 5 researchers. And it goes on like that. At Intel on my team, I'm again the only woman. I stopped feeling like an alien over the years, but it's still bugging me. So I came up with this idea of the women-only workshop because I thought, if I just create some space where those girls can sit and can figure out this is not scary, it's not biting you, it's not rocket science, it's actual fun poking around binaries and looking at x86 assembly. Maybe they'll stick around. Maybe I'm not going to be that lonely anymore in the future. It's not actually that much fun feeling like an alien whenever you enter a room and everyone just looks different. So yeah, that was the idea, and it worked out incredibly well. If you look here in the first row, there's four girls sitting. 4. I think there is a 5th one somewhere around here, hiding in the back. So 5 of the former attendees of my workshop are here today. And if you look through at the greater room, you won't see all that many women around here. This is actually impressive. Hi, guys. So yeah, the idea how I like to call it is we don't want to separate that workshop from the security community. We don't want something that's our own. We don't want to start a larger sisterhood that takes over the industry. We want to create some space. We want to create some space that's inviting female engineers to come to the workshop and to grow their skills and to feel comfortable, master something complicated. And after the workshop, the girls went out and they went crazy. So for the last 3 years, we've been doing that workshop, and I've been following some of those engineers in their career development, and you won't believe, they literally blew my mind. We now have one of them who's, I think she's here as well. She's giving a workshop on ARM shell codes here at HITB. And again, that workshop we were sitting there, we were looking at a piece of malware for 2 days. There was no ARM involved at all, no shell coding. But 3 years later, she's now giving workshops on ARM shell codes. There's another candidate I like very much. I think I have a slide on that. No, another candidate I like very much is now working on Windows kernel internals. She's injecting code from kernel land to user land and working on kernel shims. And there's a couple of others that just picked totally different research fields and had insane success there. And now after the 3 editions, we go out and create spin-off events of the larger Black Hoodie project, which I call minority-driven bootcamps. You wouldn't believe how much drive you will find if you have a room of women in front of you and you tell them, you give them a sledgehammer and you want them to take the binary apart, like with aggression. They will be like, yes, let's do this. This is the kind of scary part, and this is exactly the drive that I see in the workshops that I think makes them go out and conquer the industry. What I mean with we're creating spin-offs. We had 3 main editions. This year there will be another main edition that's been going to be hosted in Berlin. But we also started to have little Black Hoodie events on the side. They're not as strict as the main conference. There was one of those spin-offs happening this year's Troopers Conference that was open for male attendees as well, because the main idea with those spin-offs, as I see it, is not, as with the main event, creating space where everyone can feel comfortable, but to put the attendees in the roles of the trainers. So all of those spin-off events will be taught not by me, but by the former attendees at the workshop. So they go out and spread their knowledge themselves and feed their own efforts back to the larger community. Because this is where I see the future of those workshops, not as a closed-off cubicle where we hide and do our own things, but as an effort to strengthen the community from within, to come up with more trainers, with more speakers, with more researchers, with more low-level specialists that can then go out, improve tools, and can improve detection mechanisms, and can improve offensive research, can write more exploits, can find vulnerabilities in, I'm not going to say this now, like in products. And yeah, makes the world, after all, a better place. As I mentioned, there are some candidates that have shown incredible growth after they left the workshop. There was one of them who recently hacked the Windows Minesweeper to finally show her where all the goddamn mines are. I was super impressed. I had no idea this was a thing she was interested in. And that was only like 3 months after the workshop. I don't necessarily know what she did before, but I don't think she hacked Minesweeper before. Another candidate I was super impressed with last year at the workshop gave a talk about dumping flash from hardware devices, which is also something I did not teach her. That was super impressive. Another candidate, as mentioned before, is now a world-recognized ARM researcher, giving a workshop here on ARM shell coding. And then there's another one that I was super proud of that has dived into Windows kernel, and if you see, this is one of her opening slides from one of her talks, where she talks about the kernel shim engine, and I'm not kidding, I have no idea what the kernel shim engine actually does. But I recommend you check out her talk, check out all of their talks. They're now actively contributing to our community, and I'm sitting back like a proud mama and still only doing my malware research. So this is super amazing. Also, the other girls have produced more and more research. So expect more of us to come in the future. Finally, after all that journey through my disappointments and all the things that I've learned and all the things that I've seen and the workshop and how I think we can get better, let me tell you what my recent job change told me about life. As mentioned 7 months ago, I started work at Intel and I moved to Portland, Oregon. And Portland, Oregon, you won't believe it, is like the most crazy city I've ever seen. On this picture here, you see the Unipiper. The Unipiper is kind of like a Portland legend. You might see that he's wearing a Darth Vader costume. He is sitting on a unicycle. He's playing a bagpipe that blows fire. This is kind of like the Tuesday afternoon in Portland. Right when I moved there, I was strolling through downtown and was passed by a guy in a white latex onesie who was like on his way, I don't know, to the coffee shop. A couple of weeks later, I watched a guy in a Captain America pajama right outside of my house on a bike, tackling the hill, and where he would go down. He was sitting on a bike and then he let the brakes loose and just went down the hill in his Captain America outfit. I think he was trying to fly. On another occasion, I was standing at the pharmacy, lining up at the cash desk, and saw a guy in a crocodile costume who was standing there in line with me, and I was staring at him, super curious, and no one else did. So apparently I was the only one shocked by a guy in a crocodile costume at the pharmacy. Then another occasion, I saw a guy, no, there was a girl in a dragon costume on the tram. She was just getting in, sitting down, and again, I was staring at her, no one else did anything. Portland has a mermaid parade where you have to dress up as a mermaid to actually take part. They have a bacon festival. They have lots of different glow parties with lots of neon colors. And yeah, I'm pretty much out of all the crazies, but you get the idea. Portland has totally blown my mind in what people are actually capable of doing if they are just themselves. So if they feel comfortable in the position that they're in, they do incredible things. And this is something that I think our community could learn from those crazy people in Portland. If we just let everyone be exactly that great person that they are and let them go ahead and do their amazing things, then we're going to see people in crocodile costumes. So, since you all work in security, I hope you learned something from my talk. I hope you go back to your teams and your companies and improve the situation there and know why not build better products and care less about selling and more about security. So this was it. I'm over time already. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, hit me up afterwards. I'm going to be around at the conference all the time. So thank you very much and enjoy the conference.